So thanks everyone for having me today. The talks today have been really awesome. I think it's cool what you guys are doing here at FaceBase, and you're going to see that my talk rolls in really well with the last one. We have a lot of clinical data, and we're going to talk about how we're using it over at NIH BACPAC, the HEAL initiative, to do multimodal data phenotyping, trying to bring all kinds of different data sets together, including clinical data to study, in this case, low back pain. But you'll see that the methods we're using here are pretty general and would apply to any kind of multimodal data analysis. So I'm Tom Peterson. I'm an assistant professor at UCSF. I have my own lab. We have 3 postdocs and a research scientist. We're attached to the Department of Orthopaedic Surgery and also the Bakar Computational Health Sciences Institute. I'm an advisor at the Musculoskeletal Center and Premier Precision Medicine Rheumatology. I'm a member of the SFVA, so we have all kinds of data over there as well. And importantly, I'm the director of the Analytics Core for the NIH HEAL BACPAC Consortium. So what does that mean? The HEAL initiative from NIH is the Helping to End Addiction Long Term. I'm sure that everyone here knows this. This is looking at preventing opioid misuse, looking at developing new addiction treatments, effective treatments for accessible to over 2 million people with opioid use disorder, and providing new solutions to chronic pain. Part of the NIH HEAL Consortium is the BACPAC Consortium. So back pain is one of the most common forms of chronic pain. It used to be the most common non-cancer reason for opioid prescription, but some of the initiatives goals were to lessen that, and that's actually worked over the past couple of years. Back pain is very complex, and the underlying cause is often unknown, right? So it might be neuropathic pain, it might be disc degeneration, and there's a lot of different types of data that you need to get at exactly what's going on with that patient. And a lot of it's unknown right now. Current treatments might be, instead of opioids, there are other non-opioid alternatives such as duloxetine and physical therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's not known who's going to benefit from what type of treatment, especially since low back pain is so heterogeneous. So in the Back Pain Consortium, we have us here at UCSF, and also we have collaborators at University of Michigan and University of Pittsburgh. So these are all mechanistic research centers. These are U19 grant mechanisms. Each of us had an observational data set where we looked at chronic low back pain patients over time. We collected a whole battery of data on these individuals. So this was a $30 million multi-core mechanistic research center. We're looking at conducting translational and clinical research. We're looking at mechanisms of back pain, interconnection between biology, biomechanics, psychology, and socio-environmental factors. And what we want to do is we want to look at the optimal or the most efficacious and cost-effective metrics to capture to understand chronic low back pain, and also which ones are going to be the most effective treatments for specific types of patients. So this is sort of an overview of the different types of data that we have, right? So obviously we have lots of patient details. We just mentioned electronic health records, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit later. We also have biobehavioral metrics, so things like PROMIS scores, MAIA-2, PSEC, PCS scores, things that are biobehavioral domain, right? So these are like questionnaires, right? We also have ideal fat fraction. So this is a type of MRI that looks at the fatty infiltration in the paraspinal muscles and at what level. We have what we're calling the REACH scores. We're here at UCSF REACH, that's our MRC. And we had a team of research scientists come up with measurements that are specific to low back pain REACH scores. So things like disc degeneration, end plate defects, modic changes, and stenosis, right? And those are at specific levels, right? And this isn't typically done when you do an MRI. Typically, you won't have these types of scoring. That's not going to end up anywhere in your clinical notes or anything like that, right? So that's really important data. We also have quantitative sensory testing, so things like pain pressure threshold, temporal pain summation, and CPM. So these are how you respond to pain, what your levels of pain are in relation to provoking that pain. We also have things you might imagine like hip and wrist actigraphy, physical function, so 4-meter walk, sit to stand, And we have blood panels, genotyping, microbiome. So we really have a whole array of basically everything you can think of to collect for these patients, right? So we're over 9 million data points now, actually. I'm not going to go too much into each of these numbers, but there's a lot of data, right? So what do you do with all this data? Where does it end up? How can you analyze it? So the answer to a lot of this is HEAL compliant repositories. I believe FaceBase is one of them. I think we mentioned earlier that some of our data from the NIH HEAL initiative is going to end up in FaceBase. So essentially, all of the data for most NIH funded projects now are required to be public use, right? So they need to end up on these repositories, and that's actually a really good thing. A quick little story, my Ph.D. advisor, Tool Butte, who's also at UCSF, he wrote a paper called In Defense of Research Parasites. A research parasite is someone who comes along later and analyzes your data. So this doesn't mean that you're a bad thing necessarily. Actually, typically, if you form the right collaborations, then together you guys can do things you wouldn't be able to do alone, right? And that's kind of the importance of these databases and putting them in public repositories. So what we want to do is we want to have a data-driven multimodal phenotyping, right? So it's not clear to us exactly which of these data types are the most important to collect. It's not clear to us how to put them together in a smart way. And some of these data types are very expensive, like MRI imaging or ideal imaging. Ideal imaging actually uses a special weighting between T1 and T2, so it's not even the right sequence that you'd normally get. So you'd have to do a specific sequence just for this, right? So the idea is that what you want to do is you want to find specific types of patients within your initial population that you can categorize as a specific type of phenotype, right? And presumably, you can use this later on to either associate with different comorbidities or look at patients' outcomes, how you might treat the specific patient, right? So hairballs are bad, clusters are good. I think that everyone understands this. So I'm going to organize this into 3 different ways to analyze this data. One's going to be the traditional approach, so statistical modeling, univariate regressions, latent class modeling, those types of things. The next one's going to be patient-specific outcome prediction modeling. So using different data types, how can you get the best machine learning performance to anticipate a patient's response to treatment before they get treated, right? So how good can you get at predicting that, and which types of data are the most important? And then we're going to talk about knowledge integration and clinical data, published literature, existing data sets, maybe like FaceBase, animal models, these types of things. So getting into number 1 here, phenotypic clustering. So I kind of mentioned it before, but you want to find biologically and behaviorally meaningful subgroups. One of the methods we're doing here is latent class models. So here is a relation of how all the different data that we have relates to each other. These are correlations here. And so the data is highly correlated, right? So you probably don't need all of this data. You probably need a subset of this data, right? And so what's nice here is that you can actually find specific subgroups within your data, and then you can bring those to your domain experts, and you can start to tease out underlying mechanisms driving those subgroups. Maybe this is a neuropathic pain versus otherwise. And you can start to dream up different treatment responses that those types of clusters might have, right? And you can test that later on. And really importantly, doing latent class models reduces the dimensionality of the data, right? So it inherently makes it a little bit easier for AI, right? So if you have the REACH scores, which are the MRI scores, they have something like 300 variables that they're annotating in the MRI. And what you can do is you can narrow that down to a few principal components or a few classes that you can start to understand better. And what's really cool about BACPAC is that we have these collaborators, right? These other MRCs, and there's I didn't mention before, a prospective clinical trial called the BEST trial, and a subsequent trial called the BEST year trial. Don't name your variables final, don't name your trial the BEST trial or final trial. But what's nice about this is that we have external model validation, right? So these other observational cohorts, we can go look across the different data sets and say, our models work here, our statistical associations are consistent here, these classes that we're finding in latent class modeling also exist here. And then we can go to the best trial, which is a prospective trial, and say, does it work in a prospective way? Or like, would we be able to anticipate patients' treatment outcomes? So for statistical modeling, what we're looking at here is latent class models for 3 different types of data. Here, this is for biobehavioral phenotypes. In the middle is for the REACH MRI scores, and on the bottom right is for quantitative sensory testing. I'm not going to go into these too in depth, but our expert collaborators are very happy with these. Each of these becomes its own manuscript and sort of work that exists. And you can take them individually and say, what's important about the MRI REACH scores? And we can say there's one class that has low pathology, basically we can't find anything. There are 3 different classes where we're looking at different end plate changes, disc degeneration, or disc herniations, right? So taken 300 something variables and narrowed it down into 4 different categories that somebody can understand. Similarly for biobehavioral types, we're working with psychologists who specialize in chronic pain, and they're finding that there are happy endurers or different things you might name these classes. And so that brings me into a very, very small side tangent about naming classes. So we have a large language model for naming latent class models or any kind of cluster, right? So essentially, what you want to do is you give it the results of your data, so who's in what class and what type of data patterns do they have. And then you can have it start to label these using a large language model, right? And you can even do it for audiences of patients or clinicians or caregivers, right? So you can name it a little bit differently depending on your intended audience. And up here at the top, we actually had our domain experts label them, and we blinded that to the AI model, and it got pretty close. And so our domain experts for the biobehavioral data in this case, we're very happy with our large language models. And this is a tool that we're going to have up on GitHub that anybody can use. We're going to name all of our classes from here on out. So that brings me to step 2. So what do you do with latent classes or any kind of cluster after you've made them? So one thing you can do is you can assess each cluster or either phenotypic cluster or any kind of featurized derivative of the data, right? So you could say, I think that stenosis and all this stuff is important. That's sort of an ad hoc expert-driven model. Or you could say, I think that doing a latent class model is going to be important. And then you can test those 2, right? You can say, is this model that came from our domain expert or this particular latent class analysis, or maybe it's a clustering model. There's lots of different models you can do out here. But what's nice is that you can actually take them and line them up next to each other and say which one performs better at predicting who's going to respond to treatments, right? So what we're looking at here is, this is work from my postdoc Sachin, and this is a 52-week follow-up for the PEG-3 score. So this is essentially a pain and interference score, the PEG score. And so we're looking at, compared to your baseline data, how much did you go up or did you go down, right? And we want to predict who's going to go up or who's going to go down in this data set, right? That's something you can't really do yet, but it's something that's really important, especially if you're looking at treatment outcomes. And so what we've done is we've looked at each different type of data set, right down here on the right, and we looked at them individually, and then we use them all together in combination, right? And we're finding that using them in combination gets us better performance, but you might not need all of them necessarily. So for instance, currently the fat fraction, it's not that much better than not using it. Statistically, it's not better. But it might actually be important if you were to featurize it better or do some kind of latent class analysis, which we haven't done quite yet for that one, right? So this is a way of looking at specific types of data that you may be considering collecting for, say, a patient population. And you can say quantitatively, which data type is better and which data processing technique did we use that's better, right? So this is an objective measure. This is really cool. I'm going to bring us now to knowledge integration, right? So clinical data, clinical notes, published literature, existing data sets, and animal models. So here at UCSF, we work very closely with the University of California Health. Actually, my mentor I mentioned before, Atul Butte, is the CTO there. So essentially what we've done is we've aggregated all of the electronic health records. These are in a common data format called OMOP. That's not very important, but many databases are in this format, so it's interoperable with others. There's 8.5 million patients here, but I'm sure it's over 9 million now. We've phenotyped them, we've harmonized them, we've de-identified them. We've organized them into different types of either surgeries or conditions. This is also interoperable with our PRO collection data set that we actually pay a third party to follow up with our patients to make sure that we're getting enough follow-up data there. Obviously, this can connect to any kind of Epic Clarity data set or some of these other data sets I'm listing down here on the bottom right, who are our collaborators, who we've worked with them to get their data sets interoperable with this OMOP format. So OMOP, as you might be aware, is it's from the Odyssey network, the Observational Health Data Sciences and Informatics Network. There's over 18 different countries, and there's over 369 million patient records outside the US, right? So if you can put it in this database format and you can work with the Odyssey network, you can actually get many, many, many patients, right? This is a real benefit of our EHR data system. So just one quick look into what this looks like. So we looked across our University of California-wide data set. So we have 6 different UCs here. So it's UCSF, UCLA, UC Irvine, UC Davis, UC San Diego, and UC Riverside. So we have about 500,000 patients with low back pain. That's what you would expect from a data set that size. And specifically for this group, we can find 25,778 patients with temporomandibular joint disorder, right? So this is actually something we're looking at following up with this group, and definitely with the presenters in the last talk. And something cool that we found here on the right. So this is something I want to talk about. What data exists in the structured data, which we just talked about a second ago, and what data exists in the clinical notes? You know, so the previous presenters were talking about how you organize the clinical notes and how it's accessible now, but can you really get at that data? Can a machine learning tool get at that data? You know, maybe you can. But are other places that organized? Probably not. You know, so how do you get into this free text clinical note data and get the important information? So the task here on the right was trying to find how long patients have had low back pain. This is something that is not documented well in the structured data. And even if you try and get it, this plot here on the left is how good you'd be at it, right? So we trained a machine learning model to try and get this information. And our correlation coefficient was 0.887, right? But then if we used a large language model to try and extract that data as well from the free text clinical notes, and by that I mean just out-of-the-box CTEX tool. This will find diagnosis codes within free text clinical notes that might not be coded correctly. And if you add that information in here, you can get almost perfect, right? So 0.97 here for a correlation coefficient. And we had our clinical domain low back pain experts go over this data set and retrieve that manually, right? So I'll say, if you have any manually collected data, it's very ripe for this kind of project, right? How can we get that information out of clinical notes if you've already had an expert go over and get it for you? So now you can do it in an automated way. So that's kind of cool. So speaking of which, this is a project that we use a large language model to extract additional information out of free text clinical notes. So specifically here, we're looking at finding social determinants of health, including finances, access to food, access to transportation, housing, insurance coverage, social support at home, marital and partnership status, and also things that weren't social determinants of health related, such as pain scores. These aren't well documented. Also, anxiety and depression should be well documented, but it's not, unfortunately. A lot of the EHR data is going to be like that. It's going to be missing important information. And so what we did here is we trained a large language model. Specifically, this was not a GPT-based model. This was a llama-based model. And so we trained it on our data set to pull these out of the free text clinical notes. And we show that we are doing much, much better at it than traditional tools like CTEX that I mentioned earlier, right? So this is one way that you can use your electronic health record to get additional information out that might not be there. And I also mentioned very briefly, we made a tool called Filter, that's P-H-I-L-T-E-R, that filters your PHI out of your free text clinical notes. So actually, our clinical notes in the UC database are now, we've certified them as non-human subject data, which is really amazing. because you might be able to re-identify some people in certain circumstances, but our tool has been certified by an external company that is non-identifiable at all. And so we've actually had forensics teams try and go over this and re-identify people when they can't. So this tool is actually really useful, and it might enable access to clinical notes in the future for researchers like yourselves. So in the UCY dataset, we've curated over 30 project-specific datasets, right? So just a quick look at these. We're in the orthopedic surgery department, and each of these has a clinician or a resident-led project, right? So we're doing statistical analysis and machine learning. And you'll notice here, we also have our TMD patients as well. But this data set is huge, and it's actually it's a really good resource that we're building tools to make available. So how do you use this, right? So knowledge integration is sort of an art form. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have a specific way that you would do it every time, right? So what we're looking at doing is putting knowledge graphs together with large language models. So essentially, knowledge graphs, they're structured information, right? So you have things like existing literature, existing data sets, what was studied, what the outcomes were. Those would be a knowledge database, right? So on the right here would be an example of taking data and organizing it into knowledge. So you have a patient's diagnosed with a disease. The disease has a variation. It leads to a phenotype, right? In A there. And in B, you have a patient with a disease. It has a variation, and it leads to different types of phenotypes, and it becomes a big old graph like that, right? And what you can do is you can actually integrate this with large language models, right? So the large language model can comb the published literature for relevant publications. It can read free text clinical notes from the EHR to find specific phenotypes that might not be there in structured data. And it can help organize it together to become a knowledge graph and large language model hybrid that is great because large language models might be missing some things as far as like hallucination goes. It might not have the implicit knowledge you're looking for, but it does have generalizable knowledge and language processing, right? And it sort of fills in for some of the gaps that a knowledge graph might have, which it might not have completeness or lacking knowledge understanding. So what we're doing is we're integrating all this data that we're collecting in BACPAC, right, into a knowledge graph, and we're also incorporating the free text clinical notes. So this is nice because now you have a piece of information that, like the other multimodal data sets, it's a piece of information that you can use to either associate with statistical outcomes, right? So do people with this kind of knowledge graph have good outcomes or bad outcomes? You can actually take what you learn from the knowledge graph and give it to a clinician, right? Or you can put it into a machine learning model like we talked about earlier, and the other way that you can analyze multimodal data, so you can see how well this additional information from the literature or from free text clinical notes actually increases your ability to predict patient-specific outcomes. And what this might look like is, this is an example of maybe what you might do for TMD, right? So maybe your question is, what genetic variants might be involved in myofascial pain in TMD, right? And it'll actually search the knowledge base. So it'll look at relevant imaging or genetic studies. It'll look at clinical phenotypes from EHR data, gene expression profiles or existing publications or data sets. This task is called Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. Essentially, you pair large language models with knowledge graphs to enable literature-based explainable outputs for whatever your particular disease of interest is, right? And I have a couple of use cases here, but I think that you guys understand what the benefit of something like this would be, right? So there's data sets that exist on FaceBase, and you would like to find some way to make it more accessible to researchers and also be able to use clinical data for that purpose as well, right? So overall, how do you do multimodal data modeling? You do statistical analysis, You do machine learning to see which different types of data are the best for predicting outcomes, and you do knowledge integration, right? You find out what's out there on the in the published literature, and you bring it to researchers and to machine learning models. All right, well, with that, I'd like to thank everyone in the BACPAC Consortium, everyone in the REACH Analytics Core. Jeffrey Lotes is our program director, our team of experts in the biobehavioral, pathophysiology, and clinical cores. Thank you.
So very quickly from Zoom, I just wanted to comment that Dr. Webster-Syriac mentioned. So glad you're looking at TMD, as 50% of those with TMD have low back pain. It would be interesting to stratify by TMD status in the context of latent class models to determine common factors and themes.
Absolutely.
So maybe we could have time for one question if somebody has a quick one. Oh, yes, Pedro. Oh, that's
I really love the filter idea of where it removes identifiers and removes the risk of sharing. Is the data now publicly available?
So some of the data is publicly available. I mentioned previously that anything you publish on needs to be up on a public repository now. So if we published on it, it is. Stuff that we haven't published on would exist in the UCY data set. You probably need an IRB for it.
yeah. Okay.
Real quick, thank you, Thomas. Really, that's just wonderful. And go back to what Jennifer's question. That's why we have you here and then talk with TMJ people. So one of the strengths with the UC system, you are using the EPIC medical record system, right? Mm-hmm. And then how you think, when you think about integration with other electronic health record systems, such as Cerner that we use, have you thought about how that can be integrated?
Yeah, so going right from EPIC to Cerner is a problem, as I'm sure that you've encountered before. But that's why we have taken the effort to put things in the OMOP format, right? So the OMOP is sort of the public standard for these, like data sharing and electronic health records. There are I think it's an entire field of experts who are expert in putting EPIC into OMOP and Cerner into OMOP. It wouldn't surprise me if you guys have an OMOP database already. And also, you really can just narrow it down to the important data elements, like the things that we were presenting in the structured data before, and then it doesn't really matter where it comes from, align them that way.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.